7 men's stories, exciting entertainment.
Al Capone, the life and legend of a gangster. Al Capone. The name alone conjures images of speakeasies, machine guns, and crimes that defined America during the 1920s. As one of the most notorious gangsters in the history of the United States, Alphonse Gabriel Capone, better known as Scarface, became synonymous with organized crime during the Prohibition era. But behind the myth lies a complex story, marked by both violence and tragedy. This tale recounts not only his rise to power, but also his dramatic fall and the lasting imprint he left on American culture. Get ready for a journey into the world of organized crime, where reality and legend often blur. The early years. Alphonse Gabriel Capone was born on January 17, 1899, in the Brooklyn borough of New York City. His parents, Gabriele and Teresa Capone, were Italian immigrants seeking a better life in the United States. Al was the fourth of 9 children, and although his family lived in modest circumstances, he dreamed of a life of wealth and influence. From an early age, Capone displayed a rebellious nature. He was expelled from school several times, and his path into crime began as he joined various street gangs. One of his earliest connections was with Johnny Torrio, a well-known gangster who would later pave the way for Capone to become one of the most powerful men in Chicago. Rise in Chicago. In 1919, Capone moved to Chicago, where Johnny Torrio introduced him to his flourishing criminal empire. At that time, Chicago was a city in turmoil, marked by corruption, poverty, and violence. Prohibition, which took effect in 1920, provided a perfect opportunity for organized crime. Alcohol was banned, but the demand remained high, creating a lucrative black market that Capone and his associates expertly exploited. Under Torrio's mentorship, Capone learned the ropes of organized crime. It wasn't long before Torrio, following a failed assassination attempt, stepped down, leaving Capone in control. By the early 1920s, Al Capone had become a key figure in Chicago's underworld, expanding his empire through bootlegging, gambling, prostitution, and extortion. The empire of crime. By 1925, Capone had full control over Chicago's criminal underworld. His earnings were vast, and he was a well-known figure not only in criminal circles, but also in Chicago society. Capone skillfully used corruption to bring police and politicians to his side, allowing him to operate with near impunity. One of the most infamous incidents in Capone's career was the St. Valentine's Day massacre on February 14, 1929. On that day, 7 members of a rival gang were brutally gunned down in a Chicago garage. Although Capone was never directly linked to the crime, all signs pointed to him. This was a show of power by the gangster to secure his dominance. Capone's influence extended beyond mere crime. He became a sort of folk hero to those who despised the Prohibition laws. At the same time, he was labeled public enemy number 1 by the press. The reality was that Al Capone was a master of self-promotion. He portrayed himself as a benefactor, funding soup kitchens and helping the poor, all while running a bloody business behind the scenes. The fall. Despite his power and influence, the end of Capone's reign began in the early 1930s. The tax authorities, led by Eliot Ness and a group of so-called untouchables, were determined to bring Capone down. Since it was difficult to directly connect him to the numerous crimes, the authorities focused on his tax evasion, a seemingly minor but ultimately critical mistake. In 1933, Al Capone was finally convicted of tax evasion and sentenced to 11 years in prison. He was initially incarcerated at the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary before being transferred to the infamous Alcatraz prison in 1934. At Alcatraz, his health deteriorated rapidly as he suffered from untreated syphilis that damaged his brain. The end of a legend. After 6 years in prison, Capone was released early due to his failing health. He retired with his family to Palm Island, Florida, where he lived a relatively quiet life but never regained his former power and significance. On January 25, 1947, Al Capone died at the age of 48 from complications of a stroke and pneumonia. Despite his violent lifestyle and criminal activities, Al Capone remains one of the most fascinating figures in American history. His life was a mixture of violence, power, wealth, and ultimately, tragic decline. He left a legacy that lives on in films, books, and popular culture, and his name is still synonymous with the notorious Prohibition era.
Feel free to follow this channel to avoid missing any new content. Disclaimer: the images are AI generated and are for illustration purposes. The stories on this channel are researched to the best of our knowledge.